Welcome back to MAN 3025, Introduction to Management and Organizational Behavior. Today we're going to be talking about leading teams. What is a team? Well, a team is actually a group of people who coordinate their jobs in order to achieve shared goals. Well, let's unpack that definition a little bit. A team is a group of people. So all teams are groups, but not all groups are teams. I know, that's annoying. It's like all thumbs are fingers, but not all fingers are thumbs. The idea is that a team is a special kind of group. You can have a group of people that are all working on their own stuff, and they might even share some resources, such as shared leased space or a fax machine, things like that, but they're not actually coordinating with each other. Your work doesn't affect somebody else's work, and somebody else's work doesn't affect yours. A team, on the other hand, is the exact opposite of that. Not only are you might be sharing resources, but your jobs themselves are interconnected. Maybe my outcomes become your inputs. And maybe your outcomes after you get what I hand you then comes back to me and I work on it again. So there are different ways in which our work might be interconnected, but the point is that it's interconnected. That makes us a team. So number one is work is interconnected. And number two is you have shared goals. We are all attempting to achieve a goal as a team versus, say, groups, which might say, hey, this group has to have this many sales, but everybody's sales are unconnected to each other. Therefore, each person is individually rewarded, and it's the addition of everybody's work together that results in how well the group did. A team, on the other hand, if I do poorly in my job, I affect everybody else, and the whole team production goes down. Versus, say, in a group where if I do poorly in my job, it doesn't affect anybody else's. So here's some requirements of teamwork. First of all, there should be a focus on shared mission. Second, you should be putting together, everything should be put together in the same direction. You need to communicate objectives and needs. You have to be willing to sacrifice for the team and trust one another. All of these are related back to the definition I just gave. So what are some of the positives of teams? Well, first of all, creativity. As people attempt to work together, they come up with more efficient ways to get the work done. Second of all, quality. If my job depends on you doing your job well, I might make quick corrections to things that I see that might be a better way of doing things after you hand me what you've completed. So the quality is constantly being checked by the next person who gets the stuff that needs to be worked upon. Speed. As individuals learn each other's jobs, they're able to move very rapidly into handing off information or whatever the output is from their job to the next person because they've worked out how to do that seamless handoff. And as a result, things get done faster. Costs go down as a result of all this stuff, and people really kind of enjoy being in teams, particularly live teams. Virtual teams, not as much. But live teams, people enjoy the camaraderie and work that they get to do together. Now, there are some things that are negative about teams. A lot of people don't want to work with anybody else. They don't want to be reliant upon other people's work to determine whether or not they're going to do well in their own job. Like, that freaks them out. They prefer to be kind of lone wolf status where they're not dependent upon other people's work. And also, many times, as you guys are probably finding out in this class, you have some people that simply don't work. They try to find ways to get out of doing work. They provide insufficient work and leave you holding the bag because you are responsible or you're affected by their poor work. And teams can be very dysfunctional, where people end up just arguing a lot and expecting a lot from each other that's unrealistic and can be very difficult. So this is why teams are not a magic bullet for organizations. They have to be properly led and managed. Here's some of the dysfunctions you might come in contact with teams. A lack of trust, a fear of conflict, a lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, that's a very large one, and inattention to results. Like, I just throw stuff out there because I know other people will correct it for me because, you know what, you're affected by it too, and I don't really care if it's very bad. Now, how can we make teams more effective? Well, there is a model to this. In summary, it kind of looks like this. First of all, you have to pay attention to things like defining roles, establishing norms, we'll talk about those in a moment, setting goals, and your effectiveness is really based upon, what you're measuring to show that a team is being effective is team-based output, not individual output, but the whole team's output. So if you have a sales team, For example, IBM uses sales teams when they sell services and hardware to an organization. The organization might install this hardware and have all kinds of service contracts around it, but there's a whole bunch of programmers and hardware specialists, as well as finance individuals, who are involved with large-scale sales of this kind. So personal satisfaction, actual outcome, how many times you get the sales done, how much the sales are worth. Can you adapt and learn from your situation if you're in a new market, if you're with a new kind of organization, whatever it might be? These are things that you can measure inside of your organization to see if, as a team, the whole group of people as a team are working well. So this is the model that we kind of look at. In addition to the organizational context, which is a lot of stuff that you can't control, that takes a lot longer in order to create, and oftentimes is completely out of your control, we can look at, from a managerial perspective, the type of team you're dealing with, and from there, team characteristics, composition, the process you have to go through, and then measurement of work effectiveness. So let's start with type of team. Formal teams are teams that are created by the organization to get things done. They're usually vertical in nature. So, for example, your boss has you and maybe 4 other people who are in your team. Cross-functional teams are a little bit different. Those usually go across different functional areas of the organization. So let's say you're launching a new product and you need somebody from finance, marketing, and maybe somebody from HR, somebody from research and development, all to come together to work on how you will launch this product in a way that is positive and doesn't create problems at the time of launch. Self-managed teams are another kind of team. These teams tend to lack a clear supervisor, but instead are left to do the work themselves. So the supervisory roles tend to be taken on by the team members. Somebody's involved with scheduling, somebody else is involved with making sure that the goals are being met and checking off to make sure everybody's doing their tasks. In other words, you pass those responsibilities, you diffuse those responsibilities around to other team members. Self-managed teams are terrific when you have remote teams where they're somewhere else and have to take care of themselves. They don't have to be leaderless, but oftentimes they are. I don't recommend that to be leaderless. Usually that just results in the team picking an emergent leader anyway. So I recommend you having a leader, but then clearly defining the roles of leadership versus those that might be, for example, diffused to other or delegated to other team members, which might be necessary if the team leader is also doing individual work for the team. Finally, we have the idea of virtual teams being using some kind of technology to connect with each other to overcome time and distance constraints, and then global teams, which work across different national borders. Virtual teams and global teams can be physical, and they can all come together to work on stuff. IBM does this in a regional sense where they find the best people within a specific region, such as Southeast Asia or Africa or Europe, and they bring them all together, experts, in order to do installations and sell services. Virtual teams are exactly as they sound. It's very likely that you will work on a virtual team. Most people find virtual teams to be unsatisfactory. They find them to be very formal, and that the positives that they get from the human interaction with other people tend to go away because of the formality of the team and the focus on work alone. Another aspect is team characteristics and composition. So we talked about the type of team. Type of team will determine things like team characteristics and composition. The first is size. The size of your team usually should be between 3 and 15 people at the most, ideally between 4 and 7. That's the ideal kinds of size range. Mostly because 2 people as a team is a duo, and a duo or duality is very different than a group of people of 3 or more, because managing relationships is really what this is all about. When you have 2 people, you're managing 2 relationships, or 1 relationship, your relationship with the other person. When you have 3 people in a team, then the supervisor's managing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 relationships. So you see the number of relationships goes up dramatically just adding 1 more person. This is quite a bit. Actually, it's 3 relationships and then 6 relationships when you get to 3 people that you're managing, 4 people total in the team, so on and so forth and so on and so forth. So the point is that if you just have 2 people, even though it can be said to be a team, the truth of the matter is it's a very different managerial style. So size is important. Once you get past about 15 people, it gets really difficult to do. The diversity of your team can also affect things that you do. If you have an eclectic group that have varying levels of skill, then you have to make sure that people that have lower level skill are not being left behind and causing problems with team productivity. Oftentimes that involves mentorship. Also, people who are very diverse from different backgrounds can result in a lot of positives, as we talked about during our talk about managing diversity, such as increasing the quality of decisions and also increasing the not just the quality of decisions, but what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, quality of decisions, we'll go with that. Right? But it also increases the time it takes to make decisions and creates more conflict. So these levels of diversity, these kinds of diversity, are important things to pay attention to, especially in a team situation when one person can affect the entire team's outcome. Lastly, we have the idea of member roles. Roles are socially determined sets of responsibilities and tasks. And when we say socially determined, they're determined by society. They're determined if you're a son or a daughter or a wife or a mother or a father. What you're supposed to do in those roles is very much dependent upon culture, the culture that you're brought up in. But other roles, such as in an organization, those are created by the organization itself. So your job is a series of roles created by the organization. Now, this isn't all just robot stuff. You actually do have some free will in here. You get to decide how you complete these requirements. But what's interesting in teams is that not only do you have your own roles that you have to do for your job, but you also have other roles that you tend to take on based upon your personality. And this is really fascinating. So people inside of teams that are functioning appropriately might take on what we call socio-emotional roles. So let's say I'm somebody that tends to like to deal with people and see whether or not they're doing well. And in addition to doing my job well, I'm very encouraging. I tend to want people to work well together. I diffuse difficult situations. I'm really good at creating compromises between people who are trying to get work done, stuff like that. Well, those are very social, emotional roles. And they're very important to team coherence. In other words, people wanting to stay in the team, number one. Number two is getting beyond things that might be getting in the way of the work. On the other hand, I might have somebody who's just very much into getting the work done, very task-oriented. You probably have somebody like this on your team. This person tends to email the professor a lot. They tend to clarify things to other people as well. Say, this is my understanding of it. I think they're asking for this, this, and this. They tend to keep people on track. Very task-oriented kind of individuals. Those people are also extremely important. What's fascinating about teams is that you need all of this. It's almost like these are extra roles that are not assigned according to your job, remember. You take them on according to what you see needing to be done, according to your personality. So as a result, if somebody leaves a team and somebody new comes in, even if they're better at that position, if they don't take on the roles that the person who left had taken on, then there might be problems within the team as nobody takes up these roles that were fulfilling an important aspect of getting the work done. That's not a part of anybody's job. Fascinating, right? This is why team leadership, team management is such an active process. So how do we know whether or not we're doing well as far as managing teams? Well, teams tend to go through stages of development. And of course, nothing being simple when dealing with individuals, these stages of development don't happen in a row, in a serial kind of sense. First this one, then this one, then this one. They tend to happen concurrently at the same time. So the moment you meet as a group and decide what you're doing, what tasks you're trying to complete and things like that, that's called forming. But as soon as you start doing that, you start figuring out how your job fits with other people's and also how you're going to work with those people. And that process is called storming. You're kind of negotiating and jockeying for position. Because when you have interconnected jobs, those jobs tend to overlap in certain spots, and there's some negotiation about who does the overlap spots. Norming is coming up with standards of behavior. And this goes back to, again, forming. You start figuring out what's okay and what's not okay for communication. Once you figure out what your roles are, and get the storming done with, once you figure out how you should behave with each other, from communication to standards of productivity, things like that. Once all that is aside, what's left is simply performing. And lastly, we have a journey. In part 2, we'll talk about the final bits about team and team leadership.